In today's video, I'd like to talk about backup destinations. So the real question is, where do I put my backups? So you're backing up your databases regularly, but you really have to put a little bit of thought into where those backups are going. So ideally, you should be sending your backups to a drive that is separate from all the rest of your data. That way, if you lose any one drive that makes up your database, you will be able to recover. If you are sharing a drive with your backups, you can't guarantee that. You could potentially lose both your backup and your data at the same time, and then you would have no real means for recovery. So this means having a dedicated drive, volume, or mount for your backups. It's really something that it's an absolute must. You can use various methods to address the drive. It could be either a dedicated internal drive, or it could be a mount from another server. You can also use a mapped drive. You could use UNC notation to use a drive from another networked server, or in some of the newer technology, you can use when you're operating within the cloud. You could use cloud mounts. So for an Azure, that would equate to an Azure blob where you address with HTTPS. In AWS, you could use Storage Gateway, and I'm really not familiar with the Google infrastructure here, but I'm sure they have something as well. Go further, I just wanted to put in a request. If you guys are getting something out of the channel, if you consider subscribing to the channel. Got a lot of people watching videos that are not yet subscribers. If you get something out of a video, please like it and share that video. And of course, your questions and comments are always something I'm looking forward in the comments below. Now let's get back to the video. So let's talk about some factors to consider. You need to procure enough disk space for your backups. You need to make sure you have enough disk space for at least your base footprint. So that's the base footprint is basically the amount of space required for your full backup. But you also have to include any differentials that you might be taking in between your fulls, as well as any transaction log backups, and include all that in your calculations. So, for example, maybe you're backing up uh, once a week full, daily incrementals, and hourly transaction logs. So you would need to keep your space, uh, procure enough space for that full backup for any differentials that you want to be able to utilize during that time, as well as all the transaction logs. So you need to size accordingly. Then you have to look at your backup retention policy. So if we're let's say that we have that week rotation that I just mentioned, and you have a retention policy of 4 weeks. So you need 4 times whatever you've just calculated for your disk space procurement for your backups. Another thing you need to consider is reliability of the backup target. You don't want to be backing up to a target that's going down or has intermittent failures or anything like that. That's just going to cause a lot of problems when you're monitoring what's going on with your backups. You might have to rerun things if it's failing on you. And next up is the speed. You don't want to have a super slow backup target, but you have to balance the speed with the costs. So as you're you want to do some sort of benchmarking with your backup target. Make sure it's going to be adequate for what you need, but maybe not overkill. And make sure you're using something that's appropriate with your budget. And that's where the next point comes in. You could potentially use secondary, less expensive storage for your backup targets, and you can move things around. Let's say that you had that 4 week retention. You only want to keep one on your highly available uh, volume, and you could move those older weeks off to less expensive storage because they're probably more likely than not, it's going to be less likely that you're going to need those. The next thing I want to point out is it's really important that you practice restoring from these locations. So make sure that wherever you're restoring to, it's a backup destination that you're able to get to. You have the permissions. You don't want to be doing this for the first time during an emergency. So practice these restores. And restores should be done on a regular basis for any to account for any unknown changes in the environment, because you might lose permissions to a drive and you didn't know it. So that's why you need to regularly exercise your backup and restore plan. Potential issues, as I mentioned, could be potentials to the backup drive. If you're using like some sort of encryption, so in SQL Server, there's something called TDE keys, and maybe someone's changed the TDE key and you're not able to restore because that key has changed. Or if there are underlying changes in the network, just to name a few potential issues. Next thing I wanted to mention was that there is the capability in most databases to have multiple backup files. So you, instead of backing up the entire database to one file, you can split those files up. And this allows for much more manageable sizes of your backup files. And it can also significantly improve the performance of your backup. And it improves security because anyone who wants to restore your backup is going to need access to all of these files. And it's much easier, obviously, to get access to one file than a whole series of them.